Years ago, I used to work at a gas station to pay the bills. I'd sometimes worked third shift. I hated the schedule as a long-term prospect, but I'm a bit of a night owl and I liked the quiet of the graveyard. A few weeks after starting one such job on second shift, the manager asked if I minded moving to swinging, working a couple of third shifts a week. I reluctantly agreed because third shift paid slightly more and because I had done it before at other stores. My first overnight shift came around a week later. The evening went according to plan. I turned most of my attention to the usual cleaning duties. About 3 a.m., maybe a little later, I had just finished most of that stuff and was standing at the register drumming my fingers on the counter in silence. There was no traffic out on the highway, and I hadn't seen a customer in well over an hour. We were near an interstate exit, but in a fairly rural area, so weekday nights in particular were quite slow. Suited me fine. Suddenly the phone rang, and in the stillness of everything, the harsh, piercing sound of it startled my heart out of my chest. I answered it. It was the store manager who was just waking up and wanting to call and check on me. She was due in to relieve me at around 6 o'clock. I let her know all the chores were done, that everything was fine, and joked that she could come in a couple hours early and get me the hell out of there if she felt like it. After we hung up, I stood at the counter reading a book for a bit. This was before smartphones, and our store's PC didn't have a regular internet connection. Business only. Something like 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. Damn, I thought. Gas stations are normally quiet in the wee hours, and here I've had 2 calls inside of 30 minutes. I picked it up, half expecting the manager again. Maybe she had come up with something else for me to clean, or maybe she was going to be late getting in this morning. Instead, I was greeted by a frantic, heavy breathing. "Help," a voice said. It was thick, gargly, and over-exaggerated. "Down at 225. They've shot me. In the background, I could hear distinct shouting, banging sounds, then the distinctive squeal of car tires racing off. Then nothing. The same silence on that end of the phone as on mine. Blood rushed to my head and tears filled my eyes. I realized that the number this fellow had given me was the ID number of the nearest store in our franchise, just down the highway from me. He had dialed my store presumably because it was the first on his speed dial panel, just as his store was first on ours. I immediately called 911 and reported the incident. I don't actually remember the call. Then I locked the door, put the rather unfriendly "will return shortly" sign in the window, and went to the bathroom and screamed. I very acutely remember doing that. A few minutes later, the county police showed up, followed by the manager. I had to speak with them and answer a few questions, and then again some days later. The poor clerk died that night. His killers were caught later that morning. One of them was a convicted burglar and a crack abuser. I don't know anything about the other one. I continued working thirds there without issue, but I never did get used to the phone ringing in the middle of the night. Thankfully, it rarely did. The shooting was never again mentioned to me or by me while I worked there. A week after, a sign from corporate was posted near the register detailing new emergency procedures. I was a corporal back in the Rock Army, equivalent of a private first class in the U.S. Army, back in 2013, and I had a night watch shift from 1 a.m. to 2:30-ish. The guys from the previous shift woke me up to have me take over, and for a while nothing happened. At 2 a.m. or so, one of the privates got up and asked me for permission to use the toilet. At the moment, I didn't notice anything wrong with the guy and gave him my permission. After 10 minutes or so, my night watch partner asked me where the private was. I told him he was still in the toilet, as I hadn't seen him come out yet. He had a roll of toilet paper with him when he went into the toilet, so I told my partner that he was probably taking an extra large dump or something. After another 10 minutes, I still hadn't seen the guy come out of the toilet, and I was getting worried at this point. Me and my partner went to the bathroom to check on him, and at first we didn't notice anything wrong. But then we realized the last cubicle was still shut. We called out the guy's name and knocked on the cubicle, but we got no response. We decided to report this to the commanding officer. When the commanding officer heard this, he immediately ordered us to get that cubicle door open by any means necessary and get him out of there. My partner and I decided to break down the door, and so we did. When we did manage to get that door open, we found the private's corpse sitting on the toilet with both wrists cut open and bleeding into the toilet. A pair of scissors were lying on the ground underneath his foot. My partner ran to get the commanding officer while I tried to heave him onto my shoulders and take him to the infirmary. By the time the officer, my partner, and I got the guy to the infirmary, though, it was too late. The MD immediately had all of us get into an ambulance and had us taken to an army hospital nearby. About an hour later, the guy was pronounced dead. Up until that point in my life, I had never seen a human corpse before. The image of that guy sitting there and bleeding his life away still haunts me to this day. After high school, I served as a conscript for 2 years. The first 3 months of these 2 years are clubbed into a phase known as Basic Military Training, BMT. A small part of BMT included conscripts being rostered to perform sentry or prowling duties in defense of the military installation. Duties are 24/7 for all cadets, and around once a month you would be rostered for a night duty. I have 2 scary stories that happened during one of these shifts, but I'll talk about one of them for now. It was during one of these night duties that I was prowling, walking the perimeter of the camp and occasionally inspecting important stockades such as the armory or server rooms for intruders, with my buddy when something eerie happened. But before I get straight into it, here's a basic setting of the scene. For every shift, there's one armed sentry with a walkie-talkie alone in a sentry box at the camp gates, monitoring any entrances or exits out the main gate. 2 armed prowlers, one carrying a walkie-talkie, follow a designated route, and one unarmed sergeant in the guardhouse, with one walkie-talkie to himself, monitoring the sentry and prowler shifts. In total, there are only 3 walkie-talkies switched on at any point in time. Back to the story. I was on my second prowling shift with my buddy, and it was the middle of the night, around 12 or 1 a.m., and as we were walking, we heard communication over the walkie-talkie.
Sergeant, can I?
Sergeant to sender, repeat over. It was pretty muffled, and the 2 of us assumed it was the sentry requesting something of the sergeant, so we paid it no mind. But then we hear this. Sentry to sergeant, I didn't say anything, over. At this point, we thought that the sentry was pulling a prank, so I immediately replied on the behalf of both of us. Prowlers to sergeant, we didn't say anything, over. Sergeant replies, "Stop fooling around, recruits, you're on duty. Out." We continued our prowl and dismissed the event. Random communication still continued over the next few minutes. However, with the sergeant finally concluding that it was us, the prowlers, who were pranking, because we were walking around the camp and hence he could not see us. He could see the sentry, however, because the sentry box was right in front of the guardhouse, and he knew that he wasn't doing anything. When our route finally came to the part of the camp where we would pass the sentry in the guardhouse, the message came over again.
Sergeant, can I?
At this point, we were all freaked out because all of us could see each other and we all knew that none of us spoke into the walkie-talkies. Our sergeant immediately collected our walkie-talkies and even checked the bunks of the other cadets on shift who were waiting for their shift. There were no other walkie-talkies, including a spare one which the sergeant had for himself, and the message still kept playing over.
Sergeant, I need to go.
Third Sergeant Spiller to sender. Repeat your message with rank, name, and company. Pranking will be taken very serious during duty. Message over. Hello? Sergeant? The sergeant was certainly the most freaked out because all these messages were directed at him. We started teasing him about being haunted by dead soldiers from World War II just to lighten the mood, but it seemed to scare him further. But nothing could be done about it, and our duties carried out as per usual. We woke the other sergeant on shift, however, to keep this sergeant company in his guardhouse and continued till the end of our shifts. We could hardly sleep for the few hours after our shift had ended, and eagerly waited for sunrise to discuss what had happened with our other mates. In the morning, we were all heading back to our bunks in the transport truck when someone mentioned this incident, and how he started talking to his friends about it and that things were not what they seemed. We were both surprised and relieved to hear that the spooky messages were in fact from a soldier having a casual conversation with his sergeant, technically not allowed during duty, from another camp that was 3 through 4 kilometers away, hence the distortions. Their communications device coincidentally happened to be the same channel and frequency as ours, but apparently they didn't hear anything from our end. It was certainly a rare occasion, since you would need both the frequency and the channel to be set at the same setting, along with a few macroscopic obstructions to be absent in order for this to occur. Well, all in all, we felt pretty foolish, especially the sergeant, for getting freaked out. But we knew that if something like this happened to anyone else at the time, with hardly any way of determining what was actually happening, they would have been pretty scared as well. Because I specialize in post-production work, I often work much later than my coworkers, and it's not unusual at all for me to be the only person in our entire office late at night or even overnight. One night, well past midnight, I was dealing with a difficult technical issue and getting frustrated as I was tired and wanted to go home. After slamming my hands on my computer keyboard in frustration, I went to get a glass of water and take a break before I broke anything. As I left my office, I heard someone whispering directly behind my back. Our office at the time was a big open concept loft. I had the only fully closed-off office, and the other offices only had a partial glass wall. The rest of the floor was just a big bullpen of IKEA desks with just legs and tabletops. It took at most 20 seconds to survey the entire floor end to end to confirm that there was no possible space anyone could be hiding. I just chalked it up to a mistake, got my water, and went back to work. Shortly after I sit back down at my desk, I hear the whispering again. It was coming from right outside my door. The words were so indistinct I couldn't quite make them out, but this time I got a clear impression it was an English and young female voice. The instant I turned trying to see who was there, the voice immediately stopped. It was completely unnerving. Spooked, I turned on every light I could find. I looked over everyone's desk to see if there were any computers still on or any phones that were off the hook. I even went down to the other floor of the buildings to see if the downstairs tenant, who was almost never in the building, had decided to show up at 2 a.m. Of course, there was no one there, and I could see from the security panel at the door that their heavy-duty alarm system was on, including the motion detectors. The front doors were locked tight. The fire escape, stairwell, and bathrooms secured and empty. I was the only person in the entire building. Convinced, I went back to my office and opened my notes to refresh myself on the technical problem I was supposed to be solving. After a few moments of writing, I suddenly heard the voice again, but this time saying clear as day, "He's using Microsoft Office," the program I had just switched to. I turned the office upside down trying to find out what was going on. I searched filing cabinets and desks for hidden speakers, looked for concealed cameras, checked the street in front of the building and the roof of the building opposite, all to no avail. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. Finally, after I combed over every inch of the main office for a third time, I conceded that, given my fully enclosed no-window office and every check I had just done, there was no possible way anyone could be seeing what I was doing on my computer screen. This was clearly just a figment of my tired brain running wild. I walked back to my desk and sat down, and the voice immediately whispered, Now he's using Firefox browser. Which, again, was true. Thankfully, instead of running in gibberish madness into the night, a light bulb suddenly went off in my brain as to what was going on. And it turned out I was correct. When I had slammed my hand on my computer in frustration earlier, 3 things had happened that I didn't realize or intend. My earbuds, which were still plugged into the headphone jack of the computer, slipped behind my desk. I turned the volume up to its maximum level, and I accidentally hit the key combination to turn on the voice assist built into my computer to dictate to those with vision loss. So, whenever I was actively typing or clicking on things, the computer would helpfully be dictating everything I was doing in its female computerized voice. Because the earbuds are such small speakers and were dangling behind my desk, slowly rotating around, most of it was inaudible except for the odd word or phrase that, after reflecting off the bottom of my desk and the floor, sounded exactly like it was coming from just outside my office door. Aside from the actual name of the programs, my brain was just filling in the rest of the indistinct narration. And of course, the moment I stopped using the computer, as I would do the instant I thought I heard something, the dictation would stop. Until the next time I sat down and started typing again. I don't think I ever did solve the problem I was supposed to be dealing with that night, but I figure solving one huge impossible mystery a night is probably good enough. I appreciate you checking out this video, and make sure you have your notifications turned on for the channel. And if you would like to help support the channel, I would highly recommend you check out my Patron page where you can get yourself some cool perks for as little as $1 a month. You can find a link in the description. So I included a couple of those stories where it turned out being nothing major, but I enjoyed the realness of it, where sometimes you just get afraid over nothing, and in the time it's really scary, and after you look at yourself and laugh. So I hope you enjoyed those ones as well. I will catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye.